We are 6 days into July, which means new athletic director for Penn State football, Patrick Kraft, has been at work for almost a full week. As he got started, he had an exclusive interview with Blue White Illustrated and senior editor Nate Bauer. So today we're going to be talking about the big changes at Penn State football that maybe you're not going to notice because they're going on behind the scenes with a new athletic director. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. That's coming up today on the BWI Daily Edition. Let's get going. Nate joining us here on the BWI Daily Edition. Nate, good afternoon. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you? What's going on?
I'm curious. I one of the things I love about my job is working with you and with Ryan and with Greg, because you get so much good information. You get so much good stuff to not just tell the public, but I get to know it too. Like, I'm fascinated to hear about all this stuff. So I'm excited for the show today, and I want to know, you got a chance to sit down with Patrick Kraft. So what's he like? What were your impressions of the new AD at Penn State?
Yeah, he's very easy to talk to. And look, most people saw his introductory press conference or saw, bits and pieces, even clips of some of the things that he had to say. And I get it in a formal press conference when you're being introduced as the athletic director, there's a certain element of winning the press conference, right? Saying the right things, having the right sound clips, having the right things to say, and really being non-committal, right? You just get hired for the job. What are you realistically going to say about future plans for the natatorium, right?
Yeah.
That's not part of it.
We asked him every question under the sun, and he was like, I gotta leave Boston College first. So questions about NIL, Beaver Stadium, facilities, the hierarchy of sports at Penn State, his overall view of the world. The stories were great, and the energy in the room was palpable, but tangible information, what's he supposed to say? I don't know. I just got hired here. This isn't even technically my first day, which is why we're here today, because now it's technically is his first day.
Yeah, and I think the core point to correct is that, yes, it's his 6th day full time on the job, but he's really been at Penn State for about a month and a half now, right?
Yeah.
He spent the month of May, and this was actually part of the conversation that I had with him. He talked about May was really tying up all the loose ends at Boston College, and Boston College honestly moved fairly quickly in hiring his replacement. So there wasn't a ton for him to do in terms of his departure from Boston College. But that allowed for the month of June, effectively, for him to start to be at the BJC, right? To be in athletics, to tour campus, to see what the nuts and bolts are of Penn State's facilities, to talk to the coaches, not just head coaches, but assistant coaches, support staff, all of the different things and people, I think, that are critical to how the athletic department runs and what the athletic department is. So really, by the time that July 1st came on Friday, he was ready to roll. He was into it. He kind of had a feel for what Penn State was, some of its notable assets, obviously, the things that it can be proud of, and then also some of the deficiencies, some of the areas that he kind of assessed as needing work quickly.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of these things in your articles over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. The first one came out on July 1st. The other one, I think, came out today or yesterday. So if you want to check those out, bluewhiteillustrated.com, $1 to sign up, and you get 12 months of access to inside information. And Nate is dishing the inside information on the Lions Den message board, where you can get his thoughts and reactions, and maybe some things that don't make the articles. So, there's always another layer to this, and you get all of those layers. You get the whole onion for $1, and you get 12 months of access. So it is well worth your money. But where do you want to start? Where do you want to start with your general thoughts of some of the quotes and some of the comments he's made to you in this interview.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one to me that stands out the most, and because it was so blunt, was when he said, "Our facilities stink." Quote unquote, was our facilities stink. And he wasn't talking about football.
It's
Football
not
is
even no nuance November. Like it's just straight up in the middle of the summer. Yeah.
No, I mean, but look, like he's right, and part of this is Sandy Barber was trying to address some of these things, right? Like the master plan, the facilities outlook. When she came into the program in 2014, these were needs then, right? Like just all of these different facilities needs outside of the realm of football, because the first thing that everybody looked at when the master plan came out was what, T. Frank?
Beaver Stadium.
Correct. It's the only thing that anybody cares about.
Yep.
For good reason.
It's the only thing. It's one of the only things they interact with.
Correct.
The most people interact with Beaver Stadium. They don't interact with any of the other facilities. And, the other facilities that you interact with, much smaller percentage of overall Penn State fan base.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say? Like a fraction of a percent could even tell you where the Lash building is on campus, right? Like that's just, you drive by Haluba Hall on University Drive, you see the Bryce Jordan Center. So, Rec Hall, certainly, but even Rec Hall, you're not spending any time in the bowels of Rec Hall,
right?
Trying to find the women's volleyball offices, right? Like that's just not part of it. Women's
and
soccer.
If you're going to, like, how many people fit in Rec Hall? How many?
6,000?
6,000. Okay.
7 maybe.
That's not even 10% of the people that go through Beaver Stadium on a average game day. So, but these are areas and these are things that he immediately pointed out to you as far as these need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think the premise is fairly straightforward, which is simply if we're going to carry, right, if Penn State is going to carry 31 sports, okay, and that hockey is gleaming new facility, that football at Beaver Stadium, you know what those things are. But if you're going to have a women's soccer team that wins a national championship in 2015, that's not that long ago, that doesn't have indoor plumbing at its stadium, right? Like porta potties. That doesn't jive. Like that's not okay. So that was what he said was more or less, I'm paraphrasing, that he wasn't trying to say that these need to be palatial estates, that you need to invest, crazy amounts of money into having the best facilities in the world for non-revenue Olympic sports. But you do have to, you owe it to your student athletes to have a locker room at their stadium.
Yeah.
And it's not just women's soccer, but I think, or men's soccer, but both of those soccer teams. But the point is there that, like, yes, those are probably the most pressing, but Penn State has a swimming and diving team.
Yep.
The natatorium is in disrepair. It's no good. They got to figure it out. Tennis has an indoor facility that can't host matches and can't do things the way that normal college tennis programs operate because the indoor tennis complex is so bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's just.
Are these? Let me ask you. Are these easily attainable goals? And why haven't they been done to this point?
Yeah, I mean, look, like, let's be blunt about how things get done, because this is the one thing that I thought he was, again, very forthcoming with. How do things get done? Donors give money to Penn State, directed and earmarked, not earmarked, like in red ink. Yeah, this is specified. What this is for. This is what this is for. And so lacrosse has a stadium because a donor said, "Hey, I want to pay for this. This is an interest of mine. I want to pay for it." Men's and women's basketball has new locker rooms and training facilities because a donor said, "Yes, this is something that I want to pursue. This is what I want." Right. And so Yeah, a huge part of this is if field hockey is going to have better facilities, locker rooms, training areas,
Right.
if men's and women's soccer, all of these sports, if they're going to have better facilities, point blank, it is going to demand the commitment and the investment of donors, be it individual or collective. And
Yeah.
he made it very, very clear that that's something that they're going to focus on right away, is to establish those relationships, to get people excited, and to drive those facility projects forward, because it's no longer a question of like, yeah, this is a want, not a need.
Mm-hmm.
No. This has to happen. If these sports are going to continue to be at Penn State, and
Right.
I believe very strongly, secondary point here, but believe very strongly after my conversation that he is committed to keeping 31 teams. We're not talking about cutting teams.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in the plans for him.
Right.
If you're going to have them, this is what you got to do.
So that brings up the obvious next point, which was my obvious next point at the very beginning of where does football stand in all of this?
Yeah.
We've talked about how, Penn State has spread the wealth in terms of attention to their other programs. And all of this, by the way, is what Pat Kraft was known for, right? Over at Temple and Boston College, is fundraising and being able to get things like this done. So what is the effect then on football?
Yeah. I mean, and what I wrote about today was more or less the fact that he acknowledges and is not shying away from the reality that those things have to coexist and both need to happen, right? Football continues to have facilities needs. It just does. There are things that even after this latest $48 million project get done, still need to happen. The coach's offices still need to be renovated and expanded. Haluba Hall needs work. The practice fields need work. There's a laundry list of things that can and should be done for Penn State football from a facilities perspective to match what's happening nationally, to match what everybody else is working with. So that's the first point. But what he said was effectively that he walked into the Lash building, he saw the construction, he was mostly impressed, right? He felt like Penn State was in a good spot with the work and the progress that's being made from that end. But what he added to that was his relationship with James Franklin and what he feels like he can bring to the table for football is to act as an advocate pushing for the same things, right? Like to not I want to be careful how I phrase this, to not stand in the way of getting things done, to be thinking about what needs to happen, right? To wake up every day and think to yourself, hey, what can I do that can be of benefit and can be, something that pushes Penn State football forward. Yeah. And I think that that's what Pat Kraft is at Penn State to do. I think that he thinks that very much of, hey, James, what do you need? Right? Like, do you need me to talk to a recruit? Do you need me to talk to admissions? Do you need me to talk how do you need me? How can I be of use to you to further the ends of Penn State football?
The way I phrased it in this particular conversation is my wife has travel anxiety, so she will clean the whole house before we leave. Like, it is spotless. So instead of her telling me what to do, I know that this is going to happen, so I proactively do the dishes instead of having her tell me that I need to do the dishes or be annoyed that I'm not participating in her desire to have things a certain way before we leave. Kind of the same way, instead of having somebody having to be the driving force and the head coach, you've got somebody who's steering the ship with you or is, in a lot of cases, taking the lead on these things, freeing you up to do other stuff if you're the head coach. And that obviously brings us to NIL. And it sounds like it's just like more money. Like, the answer here is going to be Penn State needs to don't like they have to get donations at a level that other places they're competing with maybe don't, because they're committed to having 31 sports, and they're committed to being competitive in the NIL world with their all of the things that go with that. So how does that work itself out, knowing the number one thing right now for Pat Kraft, from what he's saying, is facilities for non-revenue sports?
Yeah. So look, there's two components that I see from an NIL perspective that need to be addressed. The first is that they need money, right? Like more Penn State fans need to embrace the reality that this is what it's going to be moving forward. Like get behind it, find the Netflix model and get as many people as you possibly. Now, obviously you still want whales. You still want, big donors to be able to contribute and to have businesses lock in on this, to make that marriage between businesses and Penn State student athletes. Yes, you want all of that. Absolutely. But the second component that I think is most immediate, Pat Kraft said that he thought that they could have, or actually didn't think, he knew that they would have NIL cleaned up, so to speak, in 3 or 4 weeks. And I think what he's talking about is just getting out of the way. Right? Like just
thank you for answering my question, because I was gonna be like, how do you fix this problem that's been here for a year and a half in 4 weeks? Like what's the secret sauce here?
So here's the secret sauce. The secret sauce is when NIL first came out, I did a series of articles about these different companies that helped student athletes, right, like sell their gear. Okay. So like they get a box, just tons of stuff, more stuff than any of them could ever use. And most of these guys give it out. They give it away to their friends. They give it away to their families. Obviously they have team issued stuff that they need to wear for practice and, team appearances, what have you. But it is such a mountain of stuff that even now you see former players selling their gear on Instagram, right? Well, there are companies that they act as a middleman, right? They say, okay, you send us all your stuff, we'll sell it for you, and then we'll write a check, and that's it, right? Like, and so that way, fans have access to whatever, like Dom DeLuca's
game worn,
whatever, right? Like it doesn't shorts, right? Like practice shorts, that kind of stuff that is not current, but came from previous years on the team. Penn State didn't do that. They didn't allow for that. There were things, like there are things of NIL that are still under the purview of Penn State athletics to say, hey, we're not going to allow these types of partnerships. We're not going to let Penn State logos or Penn State branding or any part of Penn State be a part of how your image looks in the sale, right? Like, so you're advertising.
Feels like that's a problem.
Well, no. Like, I mean, you saw today. Sean Clifford today had a partnership with, I want to say, like Lehigh Valley Medical Center or something to that effect, and I think is announcing that he's going to be doing a clinic or a camp, right? That kind of thing. Well, instead of Sean Clifford in his Penn State uniform, right, from an image that's provided by Penn State, it's him standing there, right? Like it's it's the person Sean Clifford, which is fine. But most people, when they see Sean Clifford, they see him with a helmet on. That's how they recognize him.
Right.
And so just reducing NFTs, right? The basically trading cards that are digital, right? And players making like that kind of stuff, those media rights, those types of things. Some places you're able to sell those. Penn State, you're not.
Is this okay? So is this enough? Like I understand getting out of the way, opening up these other opportunities once again for guys to go earn their own thing. And I know that we've talked about a lot of other places, and maybe that'll never be the model at Penn State. And it seems like that won't be the model at Penn State of like, you show up and you get $50,000. There's going to be some sort of, because this is the thing that when we talked to Jason Belzer, Success with Honor, the collective also has this model of focusing on every sport and appearances, doing things to earn the money, which I think most of us support, unless you just want to get a top 5 class, unless you just want to be able to get a top 5 recruiting class.
Yeah.
So there is going to be this tension, I think. And is this enough to satisfy Penn State's need to compete, to get to the numbers we talked about 5 million minimum for football alone, upwards to 15 million to be in the real competition for an elite roster? Can they do that through the model that they have and kind of what you just outlined?
Yeah. Well, so yes, and so there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now. One of them is these mega donors. John Ruiz, he's the easiest target at Miami, is trying to buy a team, right? Like he is effectively saying, hey, my money is best. All these guys are getting hit up constantly to make facilities improvements. Miami's facilities stink. They do. They're not very good. Okay. So John Ruiz has a proposition in front of him, right? He can dump 150 million of his own dollars into helping Miami athletics improve its facilities. And whether or not that actually makes an impact and improves the product on the field, yeah, maybe it would. Or instead of spending $150 million, he could spend 15 on getting really, really good players to come to Miami. And I understand everybody's going to say, oh, enticement. That's exactly what's happening, right? Like, don't kid yourself. That is exactly what's happening all over the place. I'm not saying specifically Miami because I don't want to get sued, but it's happening all over the place. And so that is the way to, hey, he's doing it at 10% of the cost rather than building up Miami's facilities. He's very simply buying a team. Fine. That is
he is trying to find people to endorse his product, Nate. Come on.
It's true.
But
look, like, Penn State isn't attempting to do that model, and I'm not sure that Penn State has to do that model. I think that the biggest this is my own personal opinion, but also something that I think has been reflected by some of the comments of James Franklin and now Pat Kraft, is the goal should be to have that collective Success with Honor funded at a baseline threshold of $5 million annually. That money needs to be on tap.
Just football. I'm going to say it again.
Football.
For
100%.
Just football, because the numbers that we were given were all for all of the sports. And it sounds like, and this is something going back to something Patrick Kraft has talked about, like he mentioned Cale Sanderson multiple times, not only in your interview, but in the press conference with his introductory press conference. And deservedly so. But that machine is rolling. Not to say that they don't deserve new facilities and they don't deserve these things, because they absolutely do. But they're the Alabama. You know, they've already got a significant lead on everybody else, and the money coming in, it sounds like a lot of it's going to wrestling. So, like, the money that you see in the $1.4 million that we talked about on the show, that's not going to football. That's going to everybody. So how do you do this? Yeah, how do you thread this needle?
You have to. Well, one, look, you can't stop people from giving to wrestling. It's good for Penn State wrestling that is a passion and has the fan base that it does. There's no reason to stand in the way of that. And honestly, it seems to me fairly clearly from the very outside looking in that wrestling has had success with its NIL deals.
Yes.
They've done fairly well on an individual basis. So I think that that's going to continue, and they will continue, especially in that world of wrestling, which has its own broad national audience that is hardcore. Like, they are into it. They sell gear and stuff, right? Like stuff that isn't marketed to you and me, but these like wrestling fans know about it, want it, and buy it. So like all that's good. That can operate in its own ecosystem.
And by the way, my point was not to say that you shouldn't be donating to wrestling. My point was saying that it's a more anemic picture than even we've talked about for football.
For sure.
Because there's a lot of money being allocated elsewhere of the figures we know. So there is, I think, even more work to do in this situation for your number one revenue generator. So continue.
100%. It is bad. It's not good. Penn State needs to be better at NIL. I think that Patrick Kraft is going, it's going to be a top priority, is to get everyone on board and in line and focused on those efforts and to embrace it, to not shy, right? Like to not dance around it. So I think that's the first thing is just having a public stance that says, we are Penn State. We are embracing this. You have, not only do you have our blessing to donate to this, but we are encouraging of it from a institutional standpoint, because one of the things that we talked about all through the spring was that Penn State coaches show interview with Andy Frank and Dan Kabbalah of the football program. Right. Yeah. And like, that was the most forthcoming and the most
outright,
right? Like that was the most honest conversation that had been had publicly from anyone representing Penn State about NIL. That's no good, right? Like, and those guys are great. They spread an effective message, but it needs to be Pat Kraft. It needs to be James Franklin. It needs to be Micah Shrewsbury. These people need to be able to say to their constituents more or less, hey, this is what this is, and we need your support, right? And so I think that's part of what Pat Kraft is going to, like, I will not be surprised if, in terms of that 4-week timeline, if by the end of July, if there's not a public thrust from Penn State as an institution to get behind NIL and to gin up some support, I would be surprised.
And that is, I think, fairly coinciding with the start of fall sports, where you've got
100%.
You've got soccer starting at that point. You've got all the other sports that are gearing up in camp at that point. The other point that I've made previously on this topic is that the introduction of what you just said, we're open for business. There is somebody there who is going to take the call about this stuff and will make calls about this stuff. James Franklin is a polarizing figure. And he has been, as you pointed out, football and James Franklin have been really the only people talking about NIL at Penn State over the last year and a half. So not having James Franklin as the spokesperson, because half of all of Penn State fans seem to hate him, and the other half seem to be like, you know what I mean? Like,
I wouldn't go that far, but yes,
I'm hyperbole to make a point of, like, there is a division, and you would imagine that, right? Like, unless you're this unsullied national champion head coach, every other coach is probably in the same boat of, like, some of the people don't like him because he lost a game that made them angry. And Pat Kraft doesn't have that on him. He doesn't have that particular, like, part of his job.
Yeah.
So he can go out there and be the spokesperson for this, and it will be less inflammatory.
There is when Nick Saban, and again, this is one of those multiple things going on, but when Nick Saban has to explain it to his constituents, fans, what this is, and it feels the need or feels behind on getting that support, that tells you something, right? Right? Like, some of these programs that are blue bloods, so to speak, the appetite is not there. And for what appears to me from the fan side of things, probably pretty good reason, right? Like, if you're a Penn State fan and you've been following Penn State for 40 years, and Penn State's had ups, they've had downs, but for the most part has been a consistent top 15, top 25 type program, right? Just not in the top 5, but always giving yourself a chance, being in that conversation nationally.
Yeah.
If you've done that for 40 years and today they're saying to you, hey, you know what? That was then. And for us to be able to continue to do this, we need triple the amount that you've previously invested in the program, whether that's tickets, whether that's Nittany Lion Club donations, whatever your support for the program has been, we need that to triple. Right. You know what the reaction is yeah, no thanks. I'm not into that all that much. Right. Like, what if I was able to have if we were able to have that success for 40 years without my tripled investment, why should that not be able to continue? And it is incumbent upon Pat Kraft, James Franklin, Micah Shrewsbury, so on and so forth, to be able to deliver that message, to be able to say, hey, this is where things are. This is what they're needed. It's funny to me because when Bill O'Brien came in to Penn State and they started the Coach's Caravan, right? Like, and everybody thought of the Coach's Caravan as like, oh, it's a public rehabilitation of Penn State's image to a certain extent, right? In the aftermath. That's not really what it was, right? What Coach's Caravan was getting out and having face-to-face conversations with people with money to get them to provide more support for Penn State athletics. That hasn't happened in a few years. I'm not even suggesting that that's the most effective way to do it, but that messaging and getting that message out of, one, Penn State has serious infrastructure needs. Yeah. On the whole, has to happen. Getting that message out and rallying support for it. And then also, hey, we need you here, but we also need you here in NIL. We need your support in NIL. These are perfect opportunities for your business, for you as fans to have a direct impact on the success of the football program.
Right. A couple of things coming up this fall that I think are important. First off is talking about where sports like basketball and football, revenue-generating sports that need these things to compete, where they stand in the national picture, where they stand right now, having a better gauge of that going into September and October. So really, to me, when I'm talking about like what's the picture here, I don't foresee any big changes happening until 2023. Like you might during the season, I think you're gonna see some of this pick up. But is that a fair and reasonable way to look at it? Of like, okay, so we've got now, and this summer is kind of like we're building the ship. We're going to set sail during the fall, and you're going to see where we're going in 2023. Because right now, like this urgency of now, today, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of headwind. There's no wind in the sails here. And is that fast enough?
I think it's in Pat Kraft's sails. I do. I mean, I think that he recognized it as a serious thing. Look, and I'm just spitballing. I genuinely have no concept of what the rollout is going to be, but getting and again, like this is one of the other complications is individual state laws have different ramifications, right? So what Southern Cal can do at California might not be the same as what Penn State can do in Pennsylvania due to Penn State's NIL law.
Right.
However, my guess is that anything and everything that would be within the scope of Pennsylvania's law, Penn State will have a plan to roll out in the very immediate future. I don't know. Like, I don't know, because to me, there's a little bit of confusion. I'm not that up on whether or not can Penn State proper provide a marketplace for the player to sell autographed footballs. I don't know the answer to that.
Right. From what I understand from our conversation, like, so student athlete NIL, Jason Belzer is a third party working with a second party, Success with Honor. Yeah. They cannot talk directly to, and he described it as the Learfield of of NIL, Learfield works directly with
Right.
the university. So there is that level of separation that I would imagine. And again, from what I've heard in some of the things, there is that barrier of communication even when it comes to the ability to direct people to the right place. They can say our preferred blankety blank, but they can't say, we're not, there's no partnership. There's no direct partnership with that. And from the NIL perspective of doing it in-house, I don't think anyone's doing stuff like that, are they?
No, they are. Southern Cal's website had Caleb Williams autographed footballs at the onset of him coming to Southern Cal. Like, that was, you could go to Southern Cal's, right? So go PSU Sports for Southern Cal. You could do that. You could buy a helmet. You could buy a jersey. I don't know.
That's a significant difference. That is a significant difference.
It hasn't even been a subject worth broaching previously because it was just a non-starter. It was not in the identity of what Penn State and how Penn State was going to handle NIL.
Yeah.
If that's a possibility, if that's something that Penn State doesn't have to, like, the relationship with Success with Honor is there, right? Whether they can say it or not, that's what it is Penn State, like, preferred NIL, fine. But if Penn State proper can start selling and being a marketplace for the sale of some of these things, and you can cut out the middleman, make more money for the student athletes, then I think that's something that they would explore. I think that's something that they would do. I mean, all kinds of things. Having it up like commercials for Success with Honor during football games, that should be happening.
Yep.
Like, all that stuff needs to happen.
So that in mind, that kind of topic, and this is the reason I phrase it the way to start this part of the conversation is, from a football perspective, Penn State cannot go into the next cycle. Class of 2024, the next offseason, the next football season, 2023. They cannot go into that with the situation they're in. They'll lose, like what you've talked about and what everyone has been describing. Pat Kraft talked about it in his introductory press conference, sharks in the water that are bribing players to leave schools.
Yep.
You can't go into the next offseason with this particular situation. But let me spin it forward a little bit. Immediate future, NIL, this is very important for Penn State's overall health, for all of their particular rosters and things. But you mentioned USC, UCLA, the expansion, in the long run, is this even where we're going? Like, is this does all of this matter in 5 to 10 years? Knowing that 5 to 10 years is still a long time.
Does it matter? It does. It's just what is the resolution on employee status for college football players?
Yeah.
Point blank. How does that evolve? Who's going to be the first step towards that? Right. I mean, you're talking about not that long ago, right? 4 years that Northwestern made a decision as to whether or not to unionize and decided not to do that. Look, like, there may come a point where universities end up seeing this path versus that path and decide that path is actually the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't, having to share the media, collective bargaining, like, all that stuff is a world in college athletics that certainly I'm not familiar with. I don't think you right. Like, I mean, I guess you follow the NFL much closer than I do.
I've got some ideas when it comes to, like, okay, there's a salary cap, there is collectively bargained media rights. You now, instead of, they can have NIL, you can do the hot dog commercials for Salins, you can do whatever, you can do, local TVs. That's just the side stuff, but the actual, like, then it becomes something I'm very familiar with the NFL. And this is something that the NBA free agency is going on right now. And I think a lot of people don't like some of the toxic personalities, or at least the portrayal of those people in basketball, which is very drama heavy. But as far as like off-season intrigue, Nate, oh my gosh, NBA and NFL off seasons are so exciting. And if you don't have the threat of your whole team leaving every single year, and there is some sort of like controlled environment, it's super fun.
Yeah,
like there's the recruiting aspect, and who knows how that'll evolve in a new situation, in a new environment. But then you got this other side of like, then you got to make choices. Then you can't, like, if you had a system where there was more equity, you wouldn't have the situation where you have 4 teams dominating playoff pictures. But we're so far away from that. It's just, that's the exciting part, is every year you actually have a chance.
Isn't that better though than what's currently going on in college football?
I think so. Yeah.
Where there literally are no rules, and so any player can leave at any time. It's hard for me because we all know people, right? My sister, normal college students transfer. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you find out that a university isn't right for you. You spend a couple of years there, you make a decision, you transfer. One of my best friends in the world transferred after his first semester of college to ended up at Penn State for the spring semester. Like, you don't even have to spend a full year before you know that a place isn't right for you.
Yeah.
So to take that autonomy away from, again, college football players are going to college. To take that away from them feels hard. But if they're employees and they're on contracts and those things are renewable or not, then maybe that changes that dynamic to where, hey, you're not feeling as though you have to re-recruit the entirety of your roster every single year to prevent them from sniffing around and seeing what else is out there.
Also, it's a part of the environment. It's a part of the ecosystem. You're not trying so hard to go find extra dollars, because we just spent 41 minutes and 59 seconds talking about NIL, facilities, like all of these things. These are an added layer of what coaches and athletic directors have to worry about now. They have to put that on their plate as well, instead of saying, okay, the TV money, which is driving all of this, is now like, it's just, it's already a part of the mechanism. You don't have to, and I was guilty of saying this pre NIL, of you can always go find money. Like, there's around sports, people love sports.
Sure.
You can go find more money. I figured it'd be an environment with a little more control, a little more control groups. We didn't get there, but I think you can see there's more money. You found money pretty quickly in some places to fund this particular endeavor, but did you have to? Did you have to? And I think that's where we are right now. Is it going to be so laborious to manage this monstrosity of NIL and put rules and regulations in place that can be struck down, right? Like, that's the whole thing, is you can put rules and regulations in, but they can be easily struck down, and you could be back at square one. It kind of feels like this isn't long for the world, but until it's not, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, that's what you got to do. Yep. No, this is year 18 for me. And at the beginning of my career, it was a joke how many rules were in place. The avalanche of rules, just rules on rules on rules on rules. And I always railed against just that crush of rules. And now you're seeing the other side, where there are no rules. And it turns out that somewhere in the middle is probably best for everyone.
We never get there, though. We never find a way there.
But it is very, very transparent. Like, you can see now that this is the way that the pendulum has swung has just, it's too far.
Yeah.
Not for individuals. There are no players or families of players who are complaining about this. They don't, Like, you telling me that they can make even $50,000, $100,000. Forget the $1 million contract. $100,000, that's life changing. To an 18-year-old kid and their family, because that earning potential was never there before.
Yeah.
However,
by the way, just to cut you off, and also during the prime of when this talent that you have, your marketability is at its highest, because before it was 4 to 6 years of your earning potential as a football player was just null and void, putting so much pressure on when you get to the NFL.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, the same argument was made for the NBA, and it didn't have a one and done, and so NBA could. You could maximize that earning. Like this is just science. Your body isn't going to be able, for most people, to keep up with this for more than a 5 to 10 year window.
Yeah.
Right. Like get that earning for this very unique talent that you have at this time in your life. Yeah. So that's all good. But for the game itself, I think it has become very obvious that this isn't healthy. This isn't good for the health of the sport. Now, if we end up with 2 super conferences that are,
cohabitating,
correct,
that work together, have a common set of rules, and create an environment in which you can have a level playing field of competition.
I don't know about you, but it sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
I see that as whatever this evolution is, if it's going to happen over a long period of time. It took forever to get so much done in college football, and now I think that you're seeing a backlash to that, and a sense of, hey, you know what? Like when the ACC and the Pac-12 stood in the way of playoff expansion, why? For what?
Yeah,
and so now the Big Ten and the SEC are saying that, well, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, you do you, Wake Forest, like, have a good time. That's fine, right? We're gonna do something else, and I think it's gonna happen very, very quickly.
Anything else, Nate? We've covered a lot of ground today, and I think we've gotten into a lot of these topics that I'm glad you've gotten some insight from Pat Kraft, and I'm glad we've able to advance this particular conversation. Anything left on the bone you want to give us as far as information or as far as your thoughts on the matter?
No, not really. Look, like, I think that the key for a lot of Penn State fans who are watching this, who are kind of wondering who Pat Kraft is, how he's going to conduct himself, what his initiatives are going to be, I think it's going to be fairly fast moving. He said that. He said, I'm ready to go. Like, there is no time to waste. James Franklin said it, that they needed to be ready to roll. So I am personally expecting the unexpected. I don't know exactly what's coming, but I know it's coming.
Well, as it happens, we will have, if there's anything that rises to the level of breaking news on this subject, we'll have it here on the BWI Daily Edition. Nate Bauer is going to be back tomorrow, right, Nate? I should have asked you that. For our weekly mailbag show. So make sure you subscribe to Blue White Illustrated wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube as well. And if you're listening on the audio form, thanks again for downloading the show. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We will talk to you tomorrow.